I should add that the two editors are two poets, X.J. Kennedy and Dana Gioia. And regarding how new the new material is in the later editions, I should tell you that Kennedy is now dead. So his contribution still stands. I can tell that because I've used the book in the past. And so some things change, but the essentials from my point of view are going to be in any edition.
Okay.
So somebody said that poets are the athletes of language, and what they were trying to convey with that idea is that poets use language strenuously and get it to achieve things that we don't in ordinary prose, and even that novelists don't generally achieve in their work. There are a lot of different kinds of poetry, and some are more athletic than others. There are a lot of different techniques that poets use as well. And of course, there's a certain personal element. Some people prefer traditional poetry. Some people prefer the avant-garde or contemporary writing. So what may seem perfect in the eyes of one reader will seem less than interesting to another. But it's interesting to look at poetry through the ages and see what was considered reaching to some sort of pinnacle, achieving some new effect in that time. Because, of course, as the ages pass, what was new at one point becomes common and no longer as interesting in the next, at least for writers of poetry. But I think that poetry that's worthwhile is still appealing even after it is no longer necessarily as athletic as we might expect to see. So I'm curious as to your prior experience with poetry. Michelle, I'm going to ask you to allow people to speak. If you've done this sort of thing before, you'll notice that if you slide your cursor over to the bottom of your window, you'll see a little smiley face with a plus and the notice reactions. And if you click on reactions, you'll see at the bottom there's an icon for raising your hand. And then Michelle will know to click on you and give you a chance to speak. Diane?
Hi. I had the opportunity to go to the name just went out of the Poetry Festival, the Geraldine R. Dodge Poetry Festival in years past, and heard Billy Collins speak and other poet laureates. It was fabulous. My second husband was a writer and a poet, and so that was kind of my introduction in a way, of course, through the years in school, learning some poetry. But that Geraldine R. Dodge Poetry Festival, which I believe is every other year, so it'll be next year, is pretty fabulous way to locally engage in poetry and hear lots of different styles of poetry.
Excellent. Okay. And Joanne, what about you?
I've always thought I should be interested in poetry, but I never really got there. When I read novels and people begin spouting like whole verses they just committed to memory, I'm always very envious of them. And I think I should be able to do that. And yet, for some reason, I don't quite get there. Now, when I listened to the inaugural event for Biden and that young woman, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name, but she is the current poet laureate, and she gave that marvel. I was really blown away by that. And so, and honestly, the reason as I told you, I'm interested in the concept of athletic language and the way you just described it. So I'm totally willing to learn. I'm however, not in the fold as yet.
Okay. So let's see. I want to start with some basics and looking at some poetry from earlier centuries, as well as the 20th and 21st centuries. And I want to start with something fairly simple, the question of voice. When we look at a poem, It obviously does not have the elements that a novel or a short story does. So how do we fill in the traits of the speaker? How do we know who is speaking and how much does that matter? We start off, I think, looking at who is speaking, trying to figure out the antecedent situation that initiated the poem. I recently taught a poem that begins, "Now do not let us quarrel anymore." And there are two ways to interpret that. One is to figure that a quarrel between the speaker and listener were in the offing, and that the speaker is trying to end that fight. Another is to say, what's the issue? Why do you think that a quarrel will occur? But cues in the story as it emerges from the speaker helps to see which interpretation is correct. So there is the antecedent situation. There is also word choice if we're looking at a poem that is written. When people speak aloud, tone is very important. Tone indicates what attitude the speaker, or conceivably the poet, might take towards the poem's subject. When people speak aloud, we hear the tone, and we can listen to our spouses or people we're working with. They sound happy, they sound tired, they sound annoyed, they sound anxious. When we're reading a poem on the page, we don't have a chance to hear the tone. So again, we look at the word choice. We look at cues. We look for subtext, what is being communicated underneath the actual words. I mentioned that tone involved figuring out the attitude the speaker or the poet takes toward the poem's subject. Even in a poem that offers someone referring to themselves as I, doesn't necessarily mean that that is the poet. Somebody I know once referred to the implied author as the author's best self. But in poetry, I is often a fiction. You can take on the role of somebody that has little in common with you. One of a song I know by the poet-songwriter Richard Thompson uses the voice of a murderer who's emerging from jail. And he speaks his I. Richard Thompson, who's a solo performer, often performs this song. And if you made the wrong assumption, you might think that the singer standing before you is in fact the figure in the poem, but the figure in the poem, the I, the speaker, or the person responsible for the words is a fiction created by the singer-songwriter. And in poetry, we tend to assume if there is an I, that it's an autobiographical poem. And while that might be true, most often, 98% of the time, it's not. Sometimes they share similar points of view, but even when that is the case, the poet's perception does not entirely align with that of the speaker, whether or not the word I appears. I'm going to start with a poem in the form of a dramatic monologue, where we have one person's voice speaking aloud and addressing a silent listener. We are eavesdropping between two people in conversation, only one of whom is speaking. But we will get a sense of what's going on, and I think we'll see the division between the speaker in the poem and the author, who is Robert Browning. Let's see. Whoops. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see my last Duchess?
Looks good.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. So we have the details. It's from one of Browning's early books of poetry called Dramatic Lyrics. And the setting is Ferrara, an ancient city-state in Italy. That's my last Duchess, painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. We have what is called heroic couplets for the form. Rhythmic, iambic pentameter, that's my last Duchess, painted on the wall. 5 stresses in the line, generally 10 syllables per line and rhymes. But the poem, the words, the lines are what you call enjambed, meaning that they run over. The sense of the sentences runs through from one line onto the next. So if you didn't look for the rhymes, wall, call, hen, stand, said, read, countenance, glance, by, eye, you probably wouldn't notice that there are rhymes here at all. So it seems like a very conversational opening. What do we learn about the speaker from the very first sentence? Who is speaking?
You could assume it's the Duke.
Excellent point. And his marital status?
Available.
Excellent point. So we know that he is a widower. I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. So what is it that he is looking at with his listener, who is presumably some sort of visitor?
A painting.
A painting, excellent. And we know the name of the painter. And if we know the Italian Renaissance, we don't know Frau Pandolf because that's a fiction. But the name might recall famous artists who were also priests, Fra Angelico, for example. Mm-hmm. So we know that this is something of an art connoisseur. He mentions the painter to his listener because he thinks that that's important information. But I said Frau Pandolf by design. For never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, the curtain I have drawn for you, but I. And seeing that they were how such
there's some interruption on your like it's breaking up. So maybe there's something rubbing against your microphone, perhaps your cat. No, it's just breaking up a lot suddenly. So I'm not sure why.
Start that line again, and I know if it's getting worse or better.
Yeah, when you speak, it's hard to hear you.
It just did it when you spoke, Michelle.
It did?
Yeah, a little at the beginning.
Okay.
It's weird.
What's going on?
No, it just did it. Nobody spoke. If everybody muted themselves, would it go away?
Yeah, sure. I'm just checking to make sure muted. Everybody's muted except me and Jennifer, so I'm not sure why that's happening. And it's coming and going, so. All right. What?
Interrupt me if it happens again.
Okay.
Will it please you sit and look at her? I said Frau Pandolf by design. For never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Yet, is there evidence that the listener has asked about the painting, about the look that the portrait holds?
Could you ask the question again, Jennifer?
The speaker says, not the first are you to turn and ask thus, which implies that the listener, his visitor, has said, why does she look so vivid? Why does she look so earnest? But is there a real reason to think that the visitor has done that?
Well, there's this thing about the curtain. I'm thinking there's generally the author has a curtain over the painting, and he only, or him, assuming it's he only unveils it for himself. But this person has asked, and therefore he's showing it.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting point. Is the antecedent scenario the speaker drawing the curtain and showing it off? Has he taken his listener to see this? Or did he draw the curtain prior to the visit? Perhaps it's a party. What we don't know yet, what initiated this conversation. So it's possible when he says, I said Frau Pandolf by design, that he says, oh, she looks so vivid and earnest because it's a great painter. But certainly he seems to feel that the expression on the Duchess's face is worth noting. And he seems to think that the information about the painter might be a partial explanation for her expression. We also know it's a powerful figure, that he's confident that no one gets to see the painting but him, and he doesn't have it on display all the time. Let's move on. Let's test out this listening thing.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? But
yes.
It says, you're not the first. What? No, where? I just saw it.
Yes.
But you're not the first that has asked about this. Mm-hmm. So there on line 12 or whatever. Mm-hmm. Not the first are you to turn and ask thus. So he has shown it elsewhere. I think that's what one presumes.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. Let's get someone to read the next full sentence. And I'm looking for names here. Margaret, would you read, Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence from there at line 13?
Hi, Jennifer. I need to excuse myself. There's too much activity going on around me. Okay. Please excuse me.
Sure. Leslie, could you? Alberta, Jeannie, any volunteers? I'll go on then.
Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only. Call that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek, perhaps. Frau Pandolfi chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart.
Let's stop there. Thank you so much. So it's an interesting point. Essentially, it seems as if that spot of joy would refer to a blush, or something that made the Duchess look interested. And the speaker, the Duke, as we've figured out, and we also get Sir, so the addressee, the listener, is another man. And it wasn't only the Duchess looked interested in more things than her husband's presence. Compliments as well made her look pleased. Let's move along. I'm not sure who read, but perhaps you could do the next sentence as well till we get to the line 24. She had a heart.
Okay. She had a heart. How shall I say? Too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, was all one. Okay.
A little farther then.
Wait a moment. 1 second. I'm trying to find it. Uh,
25.
A heart, okay. I'm having problems reading this. Sir, 'twas all one, my favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries, some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She
Okay,
thanked men.
let's stop there. Thank you so much. That's really useful. So initially we might feel suspicious of this Duchess. She liked whatever she looked on and her looks went everywhere. That doesn't sound so good. But let's look at these examples. What sort of things please the Duchess? A favor was a ribbon or a small gift that a man fighting in a tournament might give to the lady of his life as a sign that she was on his team. And in tournaments, women would often wear these gifts from their spouses or their lovers to indicate that this is the person they were going to cheer for. So that's the first item, my favor on her chest. What else?
She liked the sunset.
Mm-hmm. Good. And what else? Say that again.
The sunset. She liked sunset.
Good.
The dropping of the daylight in the west.
Mm-hmm. We also see
And the way
the mule that she rides, a flowering branch, all in each draw from her alike, improving speech. So what we see is that she appreciates whatever is brought to her. Many little things please her. Let's see.
But also make sure we're muted because this is like going to be crazy right now.
Okay, we'll do it more slowly. Better?
Yes.
Okay. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Let's see, I'm tempted to ask what you think of this at this point, but I'm afraid to deal with that echo again. So I'll move on and hopefully share thoughts that are emerging in your own minds. So it seems as if we haven't already figured it out, that pride in his lineage is a notable element of the speaker, the Duke's character. And his pride seems to be offended by the Duke, by his wife's willingness to enjoy the little things, her inability to distinguish between figures of rank and figures of low status. The sunset, the man who brings her mule. If someone brings her some flowers, somebody of no note. So we see the speaker displaying his pride, and it seems a bit unpleasant. We are not so charmed by this figure as we see. This may seem to us not the sort of thing that should bother a person. As he says, who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? It doesn't seem for him. Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just this or that in you disgusts me, here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours forsooth and made excuse, e'en then there would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. So is his pride diminished or enhanced by silence? I know what we should do. Let's use that Let's use that chat function. We have participants. Let's see if we can get chat going. So I'm going to open up chat and ask you to tell me through the chat. First off, the Duke says he has no skill in speech. What do you think? Is this modesty, or is this man truly lacking skill in conveying meaning through words? There's also the question of, thank you, Joanne. He can convey meaning, but I'm not sure he's telling the truth. So it does seem as if he is fibbing when he says he has no skill in speech. But it does seem to ring true, I think, that he says even then there would be some stooping, so he refuses to bring this up to his wife. He also raises the question of her response. I'm assuming that many people in this group are married. If she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, it's a good question. If your spouse says to you, you're too nice to that waiter, or no need to say thank you when they open the door for you, are you going to nod your head and say, you're right, I'll follow your directive? Or would you say, I can do what I want? Anyone? So the Duke is wondering whether he's implying that he does not speak to his wife because he's worried that she may talk back. And I think at this point we may start wondering about an age difference between the two. But basically, he comes to the conclusion, even then there would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Joanne points out that he's starting to come across as arrogant. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whene'er I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? Now, if smile is some sort of euphemism for sex, that does put a different face on things. But is it really necessary to cross over there? Who passed without much the same smile? He seems to feel that his wife was not discriminating enough, and this bothers him because of his pride. This grew, I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. Exactly, as Joanne says, if she smiles at everyone, I'm not special anymore. But what does he mean in this most recent line? And I'm hoping to hear from a lot of people in the chat. This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. What commands did he give? And what does it mean, all smiles stopped together? Very controlling, yes. What was the command? Why did all the smiles stop? And then the next line, there she stands as if alive. Judy says he killed her. Leslie says he asked her not to be so free with her smiles and she stopped. Carol says, did she die? There she stands as if alive, but she's not. All that's alive is the painting, which of course looks as if it's alive, but isn't. How did she die? I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. So Leslie offers one interpretation. He asked her not to be so free with her smiles. Anyone else? Judy says his command. What's that?
I think that he had her killed.
No longer alive. That was the last Duchess. Yes, no longer. He's in the market, which becomes quite evident as he goes on. Okay, remute. Thank you. There she stands as if alive. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. So at this point, we learn a lot more about the situation. This is a party. They are on the second floor. He has taken this man, this envoy or ambassador from another nobleman in another city-state to come and see the portrait. Who knows why? Because he wants to tell this story, because he wants to show off his art. Hard to tell, but perhaps that will emerge. And this man has come to this gathering because he is an envoy for this count who is considering making a match between this duke, the speaker, and his own daughter. As Joanne points out, he wants to marry again. Understandable, men do. He needs an heir, certainly as an aristocrat. What do you think, everyone? Would you have your daughter, allow your daughter to be engaged to this duke?
No.
Okay. So significantly, he is on the market and he is looking very seriously. We might even be a little offended. Of course, at this level, a dowry or a certain amount of money was commonly given along with a female child in marriage to the man who married her, handing over something in addition for maintenance and for the couple's well-being. At the aristocratic level, this would be a very substantial gift. So he says that he expects a big dowry, although, as he say, your fair daughter, his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. And he takes this man who is still a man of means, a man of culture, not a servant, but he treats him as an equal, which he is not entirely. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. So they walk arm in arm. And as they go, he mentions another artwork. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. Let's look really carefully. Apart from the rhyme of rarity and for me, why does the poem end with the two words, for me? As Judy says, stay away from this guy. He tames things. Why is it so important not just to say Klaus of Innsbruck made it, but Klaus of Innsbruck made it for me?
He's a narcissist.
Excellent. He's a narcissist. It matters that he engineered the commission. And I'm not sure that many art connoisseurs are so different. They're proud of the role that they play in having art created. Power, ego, definitely. And I think Judy is very wise to see a connection between Neptune taming a seahorse and this painting of a duchess who is no longer alive. Is the speaker somewhat like Neptune? Does he tame things? And what techniques does he use to have them tamed? One of the things that's worth thinking about is how the Duke sees the portrait. It presumably was a commission. Frau Pandolf came to make the painting. We'll go back, whoops. We'll go back up to look at that. This painting took some time, and we can assume that, as I say, that Frau Pandolf was commissioned by the Duke to make the painting, that the sittings took place in their castle over the course of many days. The Duke dropped in sometimes while the sitting was taking place. Is he proud of the painting? Why is it behind a curtain? What do you think? Why does he keep it concealed? And why on this occasion does he show it? Interesting. Arl Tom, I'm guessing that your name is Arlene, so I'm going to call you that unless you correct me. You suggest guilt. So it sounds as if you're saying that the painting is an unhappy reminder to him, and that's why it's behind a curtain. And I think that there is a lot of sense to that suggestion. Anyone else?
I was going to say he doesn't want to be reminded about how flirtatious she was, and was the reason ultimately that he had her killed.
Joanne suggests that, as she says, at first I thought he wanted to keep it private, but now I'm not sure. Maybe he uses it to demonstrate how beautiful she was. Judy, you say ambivalence. Is the painting a pleasant reminder, do you think? So Carol suggests that it's power, that he wants to control who gets to see it and who does not, something that it's much easier to do with a painting than with a spouse. Now, Joanne and Judy both say that he is ambivalent, and I'm wondering what the two sides are. We've seen the positive, he likes to show it off. What's the negative? Has the Duke conquered? Reminds him of her power over him. She wouldn't obey his commands. Has he conquered her, or has he simply killed her? Did he change her character, or did he just off a valuable possession and remove any possibility of a future relationship? So we look at this and we find out a lot about this speaker. We see his arrogance. We see his narcissism. We come to understand who the addressee is. But it's pretty obvious that this Duke is not Robert Browning, the poet, who definitely did not kill his wife, though he had one. We do see something that is implied in the poem that I think is something the author wanted to get across, which is the importance of the artwork and how the artwork enhances the creator, whether it's the painter or the sculptor Klaus of Innsbruck, or even the one who commissions it. We also see the reflection on the artwork that the poet has created himself. So the poet and the speaker are alike in the high value that they place on art. Though the poet is interested in painting, he also presumably thinks that art, even his own art, his poetry, is extremely powerful. Art can enable you to frame things the way you want to see them. And Browning is framing things about art that the speaker in this poem is not. Browning is also using his poem to sort of right some wrongs in history. If you notice the note that I'm going to call your attention to right here, it seems that Browning, who spent many years in Italy, though he was English, learned some history. The Duke resembles Alfonso II, the fifth and last Duke of Ferrara, last of the main branch of the powerful Este family, whose history Browning had studied. In 1558, Alfonso married Lucrezia, 14-year-old daughter of Cosimo I de' Medici, Duke of Florence. And in 1561, she died under mysterious circumstances. So she died at the age of 17. Everybody, presumably this situation was well known at the time. In 1561, it may have been a 9 years marvel, but by the time Browning wrote this poem in 1842, presumably the Duchess had long been forgotten. Now, even if we don't know the name of Lucrezia, we recognize the story and acknowledge its power. Browning has brought this story to life, has righted the wrongs of the Duchess, who never had the chance to speak. This poem offers a recountal, brings her story to light and brings her to life again. So we see the significance of the poet's view and how far it diverges from that of the speaker. Let's take a different poem now, one where the speaker and the poet seem much closer. Let's see. Here we go. My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Roethke. I'll read the whole thing because it's short. Then if you'd like, we can also listen to Roethke reading it aloud, and then we'll talk about it. My Papa's Waltz. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. Okay, I've read it so that you can see the words and hear them. I'm going to shift to a video of Roethke reading it aloud, but there's no visual. Then we'll go back to look at the poem as it's printed and talk about it with it in front of us. Here we go, Roethke himself. A recording, not a video.
My Papa's Waltz. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt.
Lovely, thank you. So let's look at the poem. What does the title make you anticipate? Let's see. I am screen sharing. Is it visible now, Jerry?
No,
No, I'm still seeing the Browning poem.
me too.
Me too.
Let's get rid of that and see what happens then. Share screen again. Let's try That's not going to work. Let's do this. Let's not share at the moment. Let's get this up to the front. And now let's try sharing. Okay, let's try desperate measures. Let's see, let's make this big. Let's see about sharing. Ah, this should do it. Okay, is the poem visible?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start up chat again so that you guys can chat more easily. So the first question is, what expectations does the title set up? And feel free either to speak aloud if it'll work for your Michelle, or to type in the chat.
Well, we know it's the boy writing about his dad. There's two characters that we expect to hear about.
Okay, My Papa's Waltz implies a child. What else is suggested in the title?
Something lighthearted, a dance, something positive.
Good.
Also, it's his papa's waltz, not a waltz, not anybody else's waltz. My papa's inimitable waltz.
Excellent. A waltz specific to a father. Now, is this definitely a waltz, or is this a waltz? Let's see, I'll ask Michelle to mute for now, so you can hear me. Is this a definite waltz, or is this playing together described as a waltz to suggest its playfulness or its rhythmic qualities? What other words are given here to suggest playfulness or suggest the nature of their interaction? We get waltz in line 4. What else is there?
Romped.
Excellent. So we see romped as well. So 2 positives, waltzing, romping. There's also a third participant who is not waltzing and who does not seem to be having a good time. Who is that?
Mom.
Very good. So we see here, we're putting together cues. And it's an interesting point. Wait, 7 new messages, none of which I'm seeing. Excellent. Thank you. We get a description of the dance. It's a romp, a hilarious trip around the house, and also someone who is drunk and stumbling. And Patty, I love your comment, afraid of his dad, but glad for his attention. And a negative element in the poem, I hung on like death. It's a common expression, but one that we often use without intending ominous overtones. Is that intended here? Carol says that I don't think the child has a choice. What sort of family is this? What is the social status of this family? What do we know about the father?
Lower class, working class.
Mm-hmm. Good. We get the cues from these details. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt. Leslie points out he works with his hands. Joanne asks if the child is a girl, but although it's not entirely clear, it says the whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy. And from that, I think we generally assume that the speaker is male. Judy points out that they are a poor family, certainly working class, and a bad relationship with his wife. Drunk is a reasonable supposition, but not a necessary one. One can drink without getting to the point of drunkenness, but certainly the man has had a drink. There's whiskey on his breath. And he does stumble at every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. I like this poem because there does seem to be some reason for some reason to notice ambiguity. Patricia says she thought he was being beaten. Comments? What do you guys think? Is there evidence of that? I certainly see you beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt. And beat time is an interesting phrase. Beat time is something you do when there's music or when you want to provide a rhythm. The hand was battered on one knuckle. So Patricia E. and Patty D. seem to be in agreement here. Other views. We do know this is a working class family. The father has a palm caked hard by dirt. We also talked about waltz and romp. Judy says still he clings to his father. And it would be kind of hard to beat someone who is clinging to your shirt. Joanne says the father does hard work by hand. And it's likely that the father got hurt at work. I think they're having a good time. Perhaps the child is a bit concerned at being dropped. He waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. And Carol wisely notes the contrast. It's hardly a waltz. The father isn't the waltzing type. Maybe he's the polka type. Maybe that's the more likely dance. My father's polka. But we have the words waltz, and we have that rhythm suggesting, and the waltz. And it's an enthusiastic dance. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. The mother does not approve. But is that the view of the speaker? Maybe that's what the boy would want, Judy Sylvan says. Are these in some ways two men uniting against in exuberant roughhousing? Are they perhaps united against a disapproving mother? It's possible. It's not definite. There are lots of possibilities here. And as I say, go ahead.
Sorry. Sometimes negative attention is as good as positive attention for particularly many kids. And, the poet is the kid. Judy says ambiguity. Absolutely. So is he being beaten or is he and dad playing? We really have to determine that.
As I say, the fact that he's clinging to his shirt, to beat someone, you need to have them at arm's length. But is this child having a good time? That is definitely ambiguous. Joanne suggests that the father is showing his love as he knows how. And if that is the case, once again, from the title, from the eye, from the word choice, is this child having a good time? So title, word choice, and say the final two lines. We'll stop here and stop on a very good line, I think. Judy Sylvan's comment that there's ambiguity. Patty says no. And I think that there is, and Joanne says yes. So definitely Judy's right about the ambiguity. So let me think. I'm going to put this down and lose that focus and bring up is this the course plan? Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to resume sharing so that you guys can see. Bring your shared window to the front. Zoom. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to share again. Share this. So this is, yes, 2 minutes. What I'm hoping we can do for next time is read chapter 3 from the book, which is called Words, and read George Herbert's poem Prayer. And if you all can do homework, I'd like you to find an object connected with any term in Herbert's poem. Now, we could just look at poetry, at the poems, and cut out some of the material in the book. But I'm thinking that having the material in this chapter might be awfully useful. So what I think I'll do at this point, 1 minute from the end, is to say I hope you'll be able to get copies, either PDFs or printouts from Michelle. And definitely, even if you haven't spoken this time, come in next time, have something next to you that you connect with elements in prayer in the poem. And if you can, read through the chapter. If that doesn't work, we'll do something different in the following session, in session 3. But for session 2, we'll work on literal meaning, word choice, word order, and so forth. And choose among them your favorite, whether you want to talk about After Prayer, The Ruined Maid, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, Riding a One-Eyed Horse, or Aftermath. And we'll see what we have time for. Any last questions?
Which book? Yes. Which book? Are you referring to the Introduction to Poetry book?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. It has been lovely to meet you all. I'm going to stop sharing so I can wave goodbye.
Wonderful. Thank you. Really very nice. Thank you.
Very
Jennifer,
stimulating. Thank you.
did we decide distribution of the packets? Do you want me to send an email to everybody about that?
That seems like a great idea.
I send everything will be like, I'll just number them and then you could refer to them by the number or whatever's on that cover. You know,
Excellent.
that first. Okay. All right. So if you're still listening, we will have those packets ready by the end of the week, and then I'll send out an email that they're available. If you can come pick them up at Edgemont, that would be great. This is the packet that Jennifer's made available for us. And then if you can't come to Edgemont to pick up, then we'll make other arrangements to get the packets to you. Okay? Thanks. Great class.
That was
Thank
great,
you. It
Jennifer.
was
Thank you.
wonderful.
I'm glad.
Thank
I put the information about the book in the chat. And if you want to try and find a cheap copy, by all means, but there are the PDFs. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.